Hi, my name is Jakob and this is a time-lapse of a painting I made in Rebelle 8. I'm a Danish artist and designer and I work with a mix of digital and traditional media. In my professional work I often move between visual communication, design, digital production and storytelling. But for personal projects like this, I usually prefer a more old-school approach where the work can grow organically. Even when I work digitally, I like the process to feel close to traditional painting. That is one of the reasons I enjoy working in Rebelle. The tools feel intuitive and there's a nice physicality to the way the paint behaves. I'm not trying to make the process overly technical. I'm mostly trying to sit down and paint in a way that feels natural. For this painting, I kept the setup fairly simple. I used very few layers and I started with a warm yellow base. I like beginning on a warm base because it immediately gives the painting some life. It also means I'm not painting into a cold, empty white surface. The yellow keeps showing through in small places and that can help unify the image later on. I also try not to rely too much on digital editing. Of course, one of the advantages of digital painting is that you can undo, cut, move things around, change things quickly and experiment without too much risk. But for this kind of painting I prefer to mostly paint over things. If something is wrong, I try to correct it with paint instead of constantly restructuring the image digitally. So, in practical terms, a lot of the process is very simple. I pick new colors, change the size of the brush and keep painting. For most of this painting I used one main brush, Bristle Flat 2. I like it because it has a good sense of physicality. The edges are not completely predictable and makes the process more fun. It also helps me avoid making everything too smooth or too polished. I do not want the brushwork itself to become the main focus. For me, this painting is more about scenery, setting and storytelling than about expressive painterly effects. The brushwork should support the storytelling. It should give the scene atmosphere and texture, but not distract too much from what the painting is about. The subject of the painting is a character I'm playing in a tabletop role-playing campaign with some friends. The character's name is Roxy. He is originally from Romania but lives in the Freetown Christiania community in Copenhagen. He is a former member of Hells Angels who got bitten by a drug addict werewolf during a drug raid. So he is now cursed with being a werewolf himself. He is hiding his true wolf form, so I did not want the painting to become a full-on horror theme. I want the scene to feel ominous, but still grounded, more like a strange character portrait than a monster illustration. The idea is that he lives in a small wooden house near the edge of the community. He's kind of a protector there. He patrols the area and watches over his territory, but he's also living in disguise. So visually I wanted the scene to feel ordinary at first glance, but with something mysterious underneath it. That is why I like the idea of showing him chopping wood. It is a completely normal activity, especially near a small cabin like this surrounded by wood. But the action also has a certain thread to it. There's an axe, there's physical strength, and there's a question of why he's looking up at the viewer. It gives the scene a moment of tension. For reference, I went to Christiania on a warm spring day and took a lot of photos. I also did some sketches on the spot. I wanted to collect realistic reference material instead of just inventing everything from imagination. Christiania has this really interesting mixture of hand-made buildings, overgrown gardens, improvised structures, murals, symbols, and small hidden corners. It's like a chaotic maze, and is part of what makes it visually rich. While I was there, I also noticed that there were some wolf-like images and mystical symbols around, which felt very relevant to this character. That was a nice coincidence because it made the idea feel more connected to the actual place. I found the small wooden house a little out of the way, surrounded by trees and plants, and that became one of the main inspirations for the painting. I did not copy it directly, but I used the feeling of it. A secluded cabin surrounded by dense greenery, and the sense that this place is both domestic and slightly hidden. I also looked at other references, dilapidated houses, overgrown yards, and different kinds of handmade structures. For the character himself, I looked at references of homeless people, rockers and bikers, and lumberjacks. I wanted him to feel like someone who has lived a hard life, but who is still strong and alert. The painting style here is guided by 3 basic principles. The The first principle is to move from large shapes to smaller shapes. I try not to get caught up in details too soon. In the beginning, I'm mostly thinking about the big masses, the shape of the house, the character, the dark foliage, the sky background, and the main paths of light throughout the scene. If the big shapes do not work, details will not save the painting, so I try to get the overall composition working before I start worrying about the shape of windows, leaves on the branches, or the details on Roxy's face. The second principle is to work all over the painting at the same time. I try not to finish one corner completely while the rest is still unresolved. I move around the image constantly. That helps me keep an overview, and it also lets me come back to areas with fresh eyes. I also squint at the painting a lot. Squinting helps simplify the image into values and big shapes. It makes it easier to see whether the painting reads from a distance. Sometimes I also mirror the painting because that makes mistakes more obvious. When you look at the same image for too long, you stop seeing it clearly. The third principle is what I think of as an equal sharing of light and darkness. I want the light and dark areas to be distributed in a way that helps read easily. The painting should not become one big mass with a few highlights or one bright scene with no structure. The contrast needs to guide the eye. In this painting, the light is important because it helps tell the story. The clearing around the man and the house should feel protected, almost like a small hidden territory. Around it, the darker foliage creates pressure, so the light is not just natural sunlight, it also has a narrative function. At some point during the process, I came up with the idea of adding a dog. Roxy patrols and protects his territory, so having a dog companion makes sense. It also gave me a way to echo his wolf nature without showing him transformed. The dog is based on a real dog I saw during my reference trip to Christiania. The dog lies sleeping as a symbolic animal presence, while Roxy himself is much more alert. The sonora storytelling hints that something strange is going on. During this part of the process, I am repainting the wall and changing the window. This is very typical of how I work. I often try something, look at it for a while, then paint it out and try a different solution. As the painting developed, I kept adjusting the balance between the figure and the house. The house and the mural has a lot of character, and it's easier for it to take over the whole image. But the primary focus of the painting is still about Roxy. So his face and his body stance are important and worth getting right. One of the things I had to work on was the anatomy of the character. At one point, the upper body and arms did not feel quite right. The shoulder and arm connection looked a little awkward, so I had to repaint and adjust that area. I wanted the pose to feel like he's actually holding the axe and leaning into the action. Later, I also looked at the legs and feet, because the figure needs to feel planted. If the feet do not connect properly with the ground, the whole pose becomes less believable. So I tried to strengthen the contact shadows and make the stance feel more stable. This is the kind of correction that can feel a bit annoying, but it's also part of the painting process. I like that back and forth process where I am having a conversation with the painting. I don't want all the answers from the start. Near the end, most of the work was about controlling attention. I want the viewer to first notice the character, then the axe and stump, then the house, and finally, the more mysterious details on the house that all add to a moody setting. That is also why I tried not to finish every part equally. Some areas need to stay loose. If everything is sharp and detailed, the painting becomes too busy, and the viewer does not know where to look. So I try to finish the story points and leave the rest more open. For me, the finished painting is about a hidden guardian living at the edge of a community. He's doing something ordinary, but the scene suggests there's more going on. He has a home, a territory, and a secret. That was the feeling I wanted. Not direct horror, but an uneasy feeling hiding behind an everyday moment. A man chopping wood outside his house, but maybe also something wilder beneath the surface, watching from behind the human disguise. The organic build-up of the storytelling is what I enjoy about using Rebelle for a painting like this. It lets me work digitally, but still stay close to a traditional painting mindset. I can build the image slowly, change direction, paint over mistakes, and keep the brushwork alive. So this was the process behind the painting. I wanted to capture the Christiania atmosphere and the character, create some sinister storytelling and character design using many varied references. And I painted it all in Rebelle using a traditional old-fashioned approach to digital painting. Thank you for watching.